The elevator doors opened, and Emeka was already smiling. He stood in the center of the Daesung Financial Tower lobby like a man who had rehearsed his entrance 3 times in his hotel mirror that morning. Expensive suit, easy posture, dark eyes moving from Zarelle to Taerion and back again with the rapid, precise calculation of someone who had walked into a room expecting one equation and was discovering in real time that the numbers had changed completely. He had not accounted for this. He had not accounted for the way they were standing, not touching, not performing anything, simply together. The specific quality of 2 people who have been through something and have come out the other side of it standing in the same direction. Zarelle felt Taerion beside her, steady, present, the way something immovable is present, not aggressive, not performing, simply there in the way of walls and foundations and things that have decided they are not moving. She kept her face still, her chin level. She looked at the man who had taken 2 years of her life, and she said absolutely nothing. Emeka's smile held. He stepped forward. Chairman CEO, warm, directed entirely at Taerion, not at her, a deliberate choice that told her everything about his current strategy. I appreciate the opportunity. I think there are misunderstandings between us that a brief conversation could resolve very cleanly. Taerion looked at him. 1 second. 2. 3. Anything you say to me, Taerion said quietly, you say in front of her. Something moved behind Emeka's eyes, a rapid, almost invisible recalculation. Of course, he said smoothly, I wouldn't have it any other way. He turned to Zarelle. The warmth in his face shifted into something he clearly intended to read as sincerity. She had once believed that face. She had once built her entire life around trusting it. That felt like something that had happened to a different woman in a different country in a different lifetime. Zarelle, he spread his hands, open, reasonable, the body language of a man presenting himself as the solution to a problem he created. The filing was a legal necessity. Contracts have clauses, rights have timelines. This was never personal. It was entirely personal, she said, and we both know that. I am willing to drop everything today, right now. He paused, the specific pause of a man delivering what he believes is his strongest card. No court dates, no press involvement, a quiet resolution. All I'm asking for is one conversation about the project I'm developing, one meeting. You don't even have to say yes. She already said no, Taerion said. Emeka looked at him. The first crack appeared in the performance, the specific irritation of a man accustomed to being the most powerful presence in a negotiation, discovering that he is not. With respect, Chairman, he said carefully, this is a private professional matter between Zarelle and myself. Historically, there is nothing historical about a false legal filing against a member of my company, Taerion said. His voice had not changed in volume or temperature. It never needed to. And there is nothing professional about what you have constructed. We are finished here. Emeka looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Zarelle. The warmth left his face completely. What remained was the thing underneath all the construction, the real face, the one she had only seen once before, on the day she had finally understood what he had done to her. Not angry, not dramatic, simply the face of a man who has run out of the version of himself he prefers to show and is left with only the truth of what he is. All right, he said quietly, we'll do it your way. He walked out. The lobby doors closed behind him. Zarelle exhaled, once, slowly. He's not done, she said. I know, Taerion said. That was him deciding to change weapons, not retreating. I know. A pause. Neither are we. She looked at him. He was already looking at her with the specific expression he had worn at the corner table for Fridays for months, the one that had no professional category, the one she had spent a significant amount of energy pretending not to notice. She looked away first. "We should go back up," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved for exactly 3 seconds. Then they walked to the elevator together. If you are watching this story for the first time, stop right here. Go back and watch part 1 and part 2 first. The links are in the description below. Everything that happens in this finale was built across 2 previous episodes, and you need every brick of that foundation to feel the full weight of what is coming. And if you have been here since part 1, since the gala, since the cubicle, since the corridor, since the corner table, then you already know that this is the episode where everything the story has been building finally lands. Subscribe right now if you have not already. Hit the notification bell. Tell one person about this story today, because what is coming in the next 30 minutes is going to earn every second of your attention. By 9 the following morning, Emeka had abandoned the legal strategy entirely, not because he had given up, because he was smarter than that. The filing had served its purpose. It had gotten him into the building, gotten him into the same room with both of them, and given him the confirmation he needed. There was something between Zarelle and Taerion, and something between them was a completely different category of leverage. The article went live at 9:17. It appeared first on a mid-tier Korean entertainment blog with a significant following in the space where corporate news and celebrity coverage overlapped. The headline was careful, not defamatory, not immediately actionable, but precise enough that anyone paying attention would know exactly who and what was being discussed. Sources close to Daesung Group raise questions about Chairman Seo's personal involvement in foreign nationals' legal dispute. Corporate governance experts weigh in. No names in the first paragraph. By the second paragraph, anyone who had seen the Crossing Tides Stands hashtag understood exactly who was being described. By the third, the questions were no longer about a legal filing. They were about judgment, about a chairman using corporate resources, a building acquisition, a staff reassignment, a compliance investigation for personal rather than professional reasons. It was constructed beautifully. That had never been Emeka's problem. His talent was never in question, only his character. By 10 o'clock, 2 larger outlets had picked it up. By 10:30, Jae-won was outside Taerion's office with the expression of a man who would very much prefer to be somewhere else. Zarelle saw it on her phone at 10:45. She was at her desk in the office space she had used every day since resigning from Daesung's payroll, the small creative office 2 floors below Taerion's that he had insisted she keep as a working space for Crossing Tides administrative matters, an arrangement she had argued against and lost. She had been reviewing supplier invoices, the kind of ordinary operational work that still sometimes surprised her, the specific grounded surprise of a woman who had spent years surviving and was still occasionally startled by the texture of simply living. Her phone buzzed. Jae-won. "An emergency board meeting has been called this afternoon." She read the message twice. Then she pressed both hands flat on the desk and breathed. She already knew what a board emergency meeting meant. She already knew what they were going to ask him to do. And she already knew, with the cold, clear certainty of a woman who understood exactly how these things worked, that she was not going to sit quietly while Seo Taerion lost everything he had spent a decade building because of her. Not again. Not another person. Not him. Drop a fire in the comments right now if you are already done with Emeka. And stay with me, because what happens in that boardroom at 2 o'clock is the moment this entire story turns. The boardroom on the 38th floor had a particular quality of silence that existed nowhere else in the building. Every other silence in Daesung Financial Tower was purposeful. The silence of people working, thinking, producing. The boardroom silence was different. It was the silence of people who had already decided something and were waiting for the formality of saying it out loud to the person it concerned. Taerion walked in at 2 o'clock exactly. 12 board members, senior directors, legal counsel in the far corner with a folder open in front of him that he was not reading because he already knew what was in it. Jae-won outside the door because Taerion had told him he would not need him inside today. He sat at the head of the table. He looked at the room. "Begin," he said. Director Kwon, the most senior, the longest serving, the one whose opinion carried the specific weight of a man who had watched this company become what it was and believed he had earned the right to protect it, opened his own folder and looked up with the expression of someone who has rehearsed a difficult conversation and is not entirely comfortable with the rehearsal. "The article this morning," he said. "You've seen it." "I have." 3 additional outlets picked it up before noon. Our PR team has been managing calls since 10. 2 merger partners made informal inquiries this morning about the company's current situation. "The merger is structurally sound," Taerion said. "One press narrative does not alter the fundamentals." "One press narrative does not," Kwon said carefully. "A sustained campaign does." He paused, the pause of a man choosing his next words with the precision of someone who understands they are about to say something that cannot be unsaid. "Chairman, the board's position is not that you have acted improperly. The board's position is that the appearance of personal involvement in an ongoing legal and press situation creates a perception problem we cannot sustain during the merger period." Taerion said nothing. He was listening with the complete, precise attention he brought to everything, not responding, not deflecting, simply receiving every word fully before responding to any of them. "What exactly is the board asking for?" he said. Not a question, an invitation for them to say the specific thing they had been circling since the meeting was called. Kwon exchanged a brief look with the director to his left. Then he said it. "A formal statement from your office clarifying that your involvement with the Crossing Tides property and its associated personnel matters was a corporate investment decision, professional, documented, with a clear public boundary between yourself and," he paused, "the founder." The boardroom was completely still. Taerion looked at Kwon. Then he looked at each board member in turn. Slowly, without expression, the specific way he looked at things when he was making a final and irreversible assessment. "You are asking me to deny her," he said. "We are asking you to protect the company," Kwon said. "By denying her?" "By clarifying the professional—" "Director Kwon." The temperature in Taerion's voice did not rise. It dropped, which was significantly more effective. "I have spent 10 years making decisions in this room that cost this board short-term comfort in exchange for long-term growth. I have been right every time. I am asking you to extend me the same trust in this situation." Kwon was quiet for a moment. Then, "This situation is different, Chairman." "Yes," Taerion said, "it is." He stood. "I will have a response to the board by tomorrow morning," he said. He walked out. Pause right here. Taerion just walked out of a board meeting rather than sign a document denying that Zarelle matters to him. That is not a small thing. That is a man choosing a person over an institution he has spent a decade building. If you are feeling something right now, hit the like button. And if you are not subscribed yet, subscribe right now, because the next scene is where Zarelle does the thing she always does when she loves someone and believes she is costing them something, and it is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. Leora called at 2:47. Zarelle was still at her desk. She had not moved substantially since Jaewon's message. She had been performing the motions of work, opening documents, reviewing nothing, closing them again, with one part of her mind running a quiet, cold calculation 30 floors below her. "He walked out," Leora said before Zarelle finished saying hello. "The meeting just ended. My contact in the PR office said he stood up and walked out without giving them anything." Zarelle closed her eyes. "Leora, I know. He walked out of a board meeting. Yes. During a merger period? Zarelle, I know. Which means he has not agreed yet, but the board is still sitting in that room, and they are not going to drop this, and the press narrative is already running, and every hour it runs without a response from this office, it gets stronger, and—" "Zarelle," Leora's voice cut through cleanly, "I know what you are doing right now. I am assessing the situation. You are building a case for why you should remove yourself. You are doing the math on what you are costing him and arriving at the conclusion you always arrive at when you love someone and believe you are the source of their trouble." A pause. Firm. Certain. "Don't." Zarelle said nothing. "I mean it," Leora said. "Do not disappear again. Not now. Not after everything. If you stay, he handles it the way he has handled everything, with complete precision and the specific, terrifying competence of a man who has never once lost anything he decided to keep." Her voice dropped. "You are not a problem to be managed, Zarelle. Stop filing yourself under that category." A long silence on the line. "I'll call you later." "Zarelle!" She hung up. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. The small creative office around her, the one she had argued against keeping and lost, was quiet. On the wall above her desk she had pinned a single photograph, Crossing Tides on its opening night. Leora had taken it from the back of the room, the stage in the background, warm amber light, a woman at the microphone with her eyes closed and her hair free and her whole body given over to something that had been locked away for 2 years. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she thought about the board meeting, about the merger, about 12 senior directors sitting in a room waiting for a statement that would cost her nothing to enable and would cost him nothing to give, except the specific thing that could not be quantified or itemized or presented to a board on a line of balance sheet. She thought about Amika, about the contracts and the forged signatures and the 18 months she had spent watching someone she trusted choose himself. She thought, "I will not be the reason. Not this time. Not him." She picked up her bag. She stood up. She took the elevator to the 38th floor. She was going to end it before he sacrificed anything else. She was going to do it cleanly and quickly and with the composure she had spent 3 years perfecting. She was going to make herself disappear one final time. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Taerion had spent the 40 minutes since the board meeting sitting at his desk doing nothing except waiting for exactly this. Not because Jaewon had told her she was coming, not because anyone had warned her, but because he knew her. He had been paying attention since the night she stood at a microphone in a corporate gala and stopped a room breathing. He had been paying attention through every conversation and every Friday and every moment she had spent trying to be smaller than she was. He knew exactly what she did when she was afraid of costing someone. And he had decided, sitting alone in his office for 40 minutes while Seoul spread its indifferent light across his window, exactly what he was going to say when she walked through his door. The elevator opened on the 38th floor. She stepped out. Jaewon's desk was empty. The door to Taerion's office was open. Subscribe right now if you are not already subscribed. Hit the bell, because the next batch is the conversation this entire story has been building towards since the first night she sang and he leaned over that mezzanine railing and asked who she was. She walked through the open door. Taerion was standing at the window, not behind his desk, not in his chair, At the window, the floor-to-ceiling one that looked out over all of Seoul like a responsibility he had accepted a long time ago and was only now beginning to question the full terms of. His back was partially to her, hands at his sides, the posture of a man who had been standing in one place long enough to have made every decision he needed to make. He turned when she entered. He looked at her face, and he said, "Don't." She stopped. "Don't," he said again, quieter. "Whatever you came up here to say, give me 1 minute first." She held her bag against her side and waited. He crossed the room, stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze. His face was the most serious she had ever seen it. Not the boardroom serious, not the chairman serious, but the deeper kind, the kind that had nothing to do with company strategy and everything to do with the specific gravity of a man who understands that the next few minutes will matter more than anything he has managed in the last decade. "I know what you came here to say," he said. "Taerion, you came to tell me the board meeting is your fault, that the press coverage is your fault, that everything Emeka has constructed is a fire that started because of you, and you are not willing to watch it burn through what I have built." He paused. "You came to tell me you are stepping back, that you have cost people enough, that you are not going to cost me too." She said nothing, because he had said it exactly right. "Yes," she said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. "How many times," he said, "are you going to disappear for someone else's comfort?" "This is different." "It is not different. You have a company." Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of a woman making a responsible argument she does not entirely want to win. "You have a board and a merger and a press narrative being constructed specifically to damage you, using me as the instrument, and that is not something I'm willing to be responsible for." "You are not responsible for what Emeka does. I brought him here. My past brought him here." "Your past did not bring him here." His voice was still level, but something underneath it had shifted, warmer, more personal, the specific tone of a man who has been patient for a long time and has reached the precise boundary of patience. "His greed brought him here. His inability to accept that you survived him brought him here. His decision to use a legal system as a weapon against someone he could not control brought him here." He took one step closer. "You are doing the thing you always do. You are taking the actions of someone who hurt you and filing them under your own name." "That is not." "It is completely fair," he said, "and you know it." She set her bag down on the chair beside the door. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it meant she was no longer holding it, no longer positioned to leave. "I am trying to protect you," she said. Her voice had dropped. Something underneath the composure was beginning to surface, the specific tremor of a person who is saying one thing while feeling something much larger moving beneath it. "I watched someone I trusted choose himself over me once. I know what that looks like before it happens. I know the signs, and I am not going to put you in a position where you have to make that choice." He was quiet for a moment. Zarelle, her name in his mouth, stripped of every professional register, simply her name, the way it sounded when he said it in corridors and street corners, and every unguarded moment across the months they had been building something neither of them had formally named. "Do you trust me?" He looked at her. "That is not the question." "It is exactly the question." A long silence. "Yes," she said quietly, "I trust you." "Then trust this." He took the final step, closing the distance between them. Close now, closer than the 38th floor had ever allowed, closer than professional distance permitted, close enough that she could see the specific quality of his eyes at this proximity, dark and completely open in the way they were never open in any boardroom or any meeting or any moment when someone else was watching. I am not choosing myself over you. I am choosing us over a narrative that someone constructed to make that choice feel necessary. He paused. There is a difference, and I need you to be able to see it. Her eyes filled. She did not stop them. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to stay without waiting for it to be taken. He reached up. His hand found her face, palm against her cheek, the same careful, deliberate gesture that had existed between them once before, in this same office, in a moment that had changed everything. Then we learn, together, starting right now. She leaned into his hand, no pulling back, no composing herself, no calculating the exit, just there, present, chosen, staying. Okay, she whispered. Okay, he said. And then, quietly, almost to himself, the way people say things they've been holding for a long time when they finally find the right moment to set them down. I have been watching you choose everyone else's comfort over your own existence since the night I first heard you sing. I am done watching that. His thumb moved fractionally against her cheek. You are not too much, Zarelle. You have never been too much. You were given to people who were not enough for you. That is not the same thing. The room was completely silent. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, Seoul continued its motion, indifferent, magnificent, entirely unaware that on the 38th floor of a corporate tower, a woman who had spent 3 years running had just finally completely stopped. She stood there with his hand on her face and her bag on the chair and the door open behind her, and she felt, for the first time since Lagos, for the first time since the night she sat on a floor with a carry-on suitcase and decided that surviving alone was the only safe form of living, she felt the specific, terrifying, enormous relief of being fully known by another person and not having them leave. The press conference, she said finally. Her voice was steadier than she expected. They're going to ask you directly, about me, about all of it. I know, he said. What are you going to say? He looked at her for a long moment. The truth, he said simply. She searched his face, found nothing there except certainty, the deep, personal, unperformable kind that could not be constructed or managed or adjusted for a room. Taerion, she covered his hand with hers, both their hands against her face now, layered, warm. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they ask, and whatever you answer, I need you to know something. He waited. I am not going anywhere, not this time. Something moved across his face, something enormous and quiet that she had never seen there before, the specific expression of a man who has been braced for a particular kind of loss for long enough that the removal of that bracing feels almost disorienting. His jaw was tight, his eyes were bright. Good, he said. His voice came out lower than usual. Because I have been sitting at that corner table for 8 months, and I am not prepared to sit anywhere else. She laughed, sudden, genuine, the kind of laugh that arrives when something has been very heavy for a long time and briefly, unexpectedly, becomes light. He smiled, not the controlled professional acknowledgement she had seen in boardrooms and briefings, a real smile, rare and unguarded and completely human, and it changed his face so thoroughly that she understood seeing it that she had never actually seen his face before. Not fully, not like this. Go home, he said softly. Get some rest. Tomorrow I have a press conference to prepare for. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped in the doorway and turned back once. Taerion, he looked at her. Don't be careful tomorrow. Just be honest. He held her gaze. I know nothing else how to be, he said. She left, and he stood in the empty office with Seoul behind him and the door open and something in his chest that had been held at a careful, managed distance for 8 months sitting exactly where it had always been, at a corner table in a music lounge in Itaewon, present every Friday, waiting without pressure for whatever she was ready to give. Except now, it was not waiting anymore. Subscribe right now. Hit that bell, share this video with one person today, someone who needs a story about a woman who stopped disappearing and a man who refused to let her. Because the chapter you've been waiting for finally uncovers everything. Every question left hanging since part 2, how they got here, when the lounge became hers, when the corner table turned into a ritual, when this became something undeniable. All of it is revealed as the story unfolds from here. And it leads straight into the most emotional moment of the entire series. Do not go anywhere. The press conference was called for 11 o'clock. Taerion's communications team sent the formal notice to media outlets at 8 that morning, brief, precise, no preview of content, just the announcement that Chairman Sao Taerion of Daesung Group would be making a personal statement regarding recent press coverage. By 10:30, the briefing room on the ground floor was full. Journalists, cameras, 3 board members from yesterday's meeting sitting in the back row with the careful expressions of people who did not know what was coming and were not certain they wanted to. Zarelle was not there. Taerion had not asked her to come. She had not offered. By unspoken agreement, they had understood that this moment belonged to him, that what he was about to do needed to be entirely his choice, witnessed by no one who could later be accused of influencing it. She was in her rooftop apartment, sitting at her small kitchen table, tea in front of her, cold, phone face up, live stream loaded, hands folded in her lap because if she held the phone she would grip it too hard, and she was trying very deliberately to occupy as little physical tension as possible. Leora had sent the link at 10:45, one message beneath it, watch every single second. He walked in at 11 exactly. No notes, nothing on the podium except a microphone and the specific stillness of a man who has decided everything he is going to say in a place deeper than preparation reaches. Tailored charcoal suit, dark tie, the face that Seoul's corporate world had spent a decade reading as unreadable. He looked out at the room. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'll be brief." A pause. "Recent coverage has raised questions about my personal involvement in matters relating to a property investment and a staff reassignment within Daesung Group. I want to address those questions directly and completely." Every camera in the room was on his face. The room was absolutely silent. In the rooftop apartment, Zarelle leaned forward slightly. The Crossing Tides property in Itaewon was a legitimate investment made on sound financial grounds, he said. The staff reassignment in question was made because a member of my company's team was having her work systematically stolen by a senior employee who has since been terminated. Both decisions were correct. Both would be made again without hesitation. A journalist raised her hand. He acknowledged her. "Chairman Sao, can you clarify the nature of your personal relationship with the founder of Crossing Tides?" The room held its breath. Taerion looked at the journalist directly. "Yes," he said, "she is someone I respect deeply, someone I watched rebuild her life and her career in this city with more resilience and more integrity than most people bring to either. Someone who was targeted by a person from her past using legal and press manipulation as weapons, and who handled every moment of it with more dignity than her attacker deserved." He straightened slightly. "She is also someone whose presence in my life I consider, without qualification and without apology, something I am not willing to distance myself from for the comfort of a narrative constructed by someone with a financial motive to damage her." Complete silence. Then he said the thing that broke the room. Quietly, precisely, in the same voice he used for everything, which made it land harder than volume ever could. "I didn't save her. She saved herself long before I was any part of it. I simply refused to pretend that what she is and what she has built was not worth standing next to." He looked at the cameras one final time. "That is all," he said. He walked out. In the rooftop apartment in Mapogu, Zarelle sat completely still. The live stream continued, journalists talking, the room buzzing. She heard none of it. She was looking at the paused image on her screen, Taerion at the podium, mid-sentence, the Seoul morning light through the briefing room windows catching the planes of his face. And her mind went backward, not to Lagos, not to the floor and the carry-on suitcase and the cold decision to survive. Further forward than that, to the part of the story that lived between the reassignment and the opening night of Crossing Tides, the part nobody had seen, the part that had built everything that came after. It had started 6 weeks after she moved to the 38th floor. They were working late, the two of them, and a financial model that refused to resolve cleanly, and Jae-won had gone home an hour earlier, and the floor was empty except for the city lights through the window and the specific comfortable silence of two people who had stopped needing to perform professionalism at each other. She had been humming. She didn't realize it until he looked up from his screen. "What is that?" he said. She stopped. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." He leaned back in his chair. "What is it?" "Just something I was working on a long time ago." She looked back at her screen. "It doesn't matter." "It clearly matters," he said. "You were somewhere else entirely just now." She looked at him. He was watching her with the specific quality of attention she had learned to recognize over 6 weeks of proximity, the kind that did not flinch and did not perform and did not fill silence unnecessarily. "I used to write music," she said. It was the first time she had said it out loud to anyone in Seoul except Leora. "Before." "Before Seoul?" "Before everything." He said nothing for a moment, then, "What stopped you?" "Someone took it from me." Another silence, longer. "That's a significant thing to take from someone," he said quietly. "Yes, it is." They looked at each other across the desk. "What would it take," he said carefully, "to take it back?" She had not expected that question. She had expected sympathy or deflection or the polite subject change of someone who had received more personal information than they bargained for. Not that. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Then find out," he said, simply, as if it were obvious, as if the answer to 2 years of deliberate silence was simply a matter of deciding to look for it. She had gone home that night and sat at her kitchen window and thought about it for a long time. 3 weeks later, she had walked into his office with a folder. "I want to open a music space in Itaewon, small, intimate, a lounge where African and Korean music exist in the same room without one apologizing for the other." He had looked at the folder, then at her. "Funding," he said. "I have savings, enough for the first 6 months if I'm careful. After that, it needs to sustain itself." "Location?" "There's a space on Itaewon Row, currently vacant. The lease is reasonable." He was quiet for a moment. "You've researched this?" "Extensively." "When?" "Evenings, weekends, the last 3 weeks." She paused. "I know how to do this. I know music and I know business, and I know what a room needs to feel like when it wants people to stay." She looked at him steadily. "I am not asking for your opinion. I am informing you that I intend to resign this position to pursue this, and I wanted you to hear it from me." Something moved across his face. "You're resigning?" "Yes." "When?" "When the lease is signed." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the folder. He was quiet enough for her to begin to wonder if she had miscalculated something, if the conversation was going somewhere she hadn't prepared for. "The building on Itaewon Row, the one with the vacant ground floor space," he said finally. "Yes." "I know the building," he said. "The ownership group has been looking for the right buyer for 8 months. He paused. "I'll buy it." She stared at him. "Absolutely not. The investment makes sense independent of—" Taerion, her name, direct, no title, the first time she had used him without the chairman prefix, and neither of them mentioned it, but both of them noticed. "I am not a charity acquisition." "I'm aware of that," he said. "I am also aware that a building owned by a stable private entity gives your lease security that a struggling ownership group cannot. It is a sound investment." He met her eyes. "It has nothing to do with charity and everything to do with the fact that what you are describing deserves a foundation that will not shift under it." She looked at him for a long time. "If this is an investment," she said slowly, "it is a documented investment. Market rate lease, full business independence, no involvement in operations or creative decisions." "Agreed. And when the lounge is profitable, and it will be profitable, the lease rates adjust to full market value with no preferential arrangement." "Agreed. And you do not get to have an opinion about the menu." Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the specific expression of a man suppressing one. "Agreed." She signed the lease 3 weeks later. She handed her resignation letter to Jae-won the same afternoon. Taerion read it in his office. He called her. "You could have emailed this," he said. "I know. I wanted to give it to you in person." He looked at the letter, then at her. "Are you ready?" he said. She thought about the rooftop apartment, the heater she had bought secondhand in her first winter, the Korean vocabulary she had studied on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the 2 years of silence, the hum in the kitchen that Leora had heard and refused to let stay quiet. "Yes," she said, "I think I finally am." The opening night of Crossing Tides was a Friday. Leora had decorated the space and taken every photograph on the walls and cried twice before the first guest arrived. The room filled slowly, and then all at once the way good rooms do. The menu, half Nigerian, half Korean, moved faster than projected. The stage light held warm and amber over everything. Zarelle performed 3 sets. Between the second and third, she looked out at the room and saw him. Corner table, partially in shadow, jacket on, dark eyes on the stage, with the expression she would spend the next several months pretending she hadn't memorized. He had not told her he was coming. She had not invited him. After the final set, she crossed the room to where he sat. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said. "You didn't ask me not to," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The room hummed around them. "There's no reserved seating," she said finally. "I'm aware," he said. "This table is available most Fridays?" "As far as I know." "Then I'll take it," he said simply. She walked back to the stage, and that was how the corner table became the corner table. That was how every Friday became every Friday. That was how 2 people from different worlds built the kind of trust that doesn't announce itself, quietly, consistently, over 8 months of music and proximity and the specific language of 2 people who are both too careful to say the thing directly, but not careful enough to stop showing it in every other way. Zarelle sat in her kitchen with the paused press conference on her phone screen and the full weight of all of it moving through her like something that had been held very carefully in place for a very long time and had finally been allowed to fall. She pressed both hands flat on the table, and she cried. Not the careful, managed tears of someone processing a specific grief, not the quiet dignity she had maintained through 2 years of rebuilding. She cried the way you cry when something is completely over, when the distance between who you were and who you are becomes too large for your chest to hold quietly, when relief and grief and gratitude arrive simultaneously, and the only honest response to all of them at once is to stop managing and simply feel. She cried until she was empty, and when she was empty, she felt, for the first time in 3 years, entirely clean. Her phone rang. Mama Ife Dada. She picked up on the second ring. Nay. Her grandmother's voice warm, certain, carrying the weight of someone who has been waiting for exactly the right moment. "I saw something on the internet today. Your friend Amaka sent it to me." Zarelle laughed, sudden, wet, surprised completely out of her. "Mama." Mama Ife Dada said it with the considered gravity of a woman delivering a verdict she has thought about carefully. "This man, this Korean man, he spoke about you on the television." "I know, Mama. He spoke about you like A pause, and then quietly, with the specific tenderness of a woman who has spent 65 years understanding what love looks like when it is real. Like you were gold, Zarelle, like borrowed gold. Zarelle's breath left her completely. Those words, her grandmother's words, the ones she had carried across 6,000 kilometers, the ones she had held on to through every morning she had chosen to keep going. "I know," she whispered. "Are you happy?" Mama Ife Dada asked, direct, simple, the way she asked everything that mattered. Zarelle looked around her small rooftop apartment, at the city outside the window, at the life she had rebuilt from a carry-on suitcase and a cold decision to survive. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady and certain and completely, entirely true. "Mama, I am happy." A long, warm silence on the line. "Then come home and show me," her grandmother said. 20 minutes later, her phone rang again. Lagos area code. She knew before she answered. She picked up. "Zarelle." Emeka's voice was different. The warmth was gone. The strategy was gone. What remained was simply a man's voice, tired, stripped of every layer it had been using to cover itself. "I watched the press conference," he said. She said nothing. "He didn't have to do that," Emeka said. "No," she said quietly. A long pause. "I heard the investigation piece dropped this morning," she said, "the Nigerian Music Journal." Silence. 3 other artists, Emeka. Her voice was not cruel, not triumphant, simply factual, the voice of a woman stating a truth that doesn't need decoration. 3 other people whose names were on contracts they never signed. "Zarelle." "The label pulled out," she said. "I know." Another silence, longer than the last. When he spoke again, his voice had gone very quiet, almost unrecognizable. "You found someone who fights for you the way I should have." She had prepared for this. She had prepared the version of herself that could hear it without being moved, the version that had survived him and built something real and was no longer reachable by his particular brand of late, insufficient regret. But she looked at the paused image of Taerion on her phone screen, and she felt something she had not expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, not the complex mixture of vindication and grief she had anticipated. Simply distance. The specific feeling of a wound that is finally, fully, permanently closed. "Goodbye, Emeka," she said. She hung up. She sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment with Seoul outside the window and 3 years of her life arranged behind her like a road she could see the full length of, from Lagos to Incheon Airport, to a Goshiwan in Mapogu, to a cubicle on the 7th floor, to the 38th floor, to a music lounge in Itaewon with amber wood walls and a corner table that was never reserved and always taken. She stood up, washed her face, put on her jacket, and she went to open her music lounge. She walked away from him for the last time. She cried for the last time about what he took. She called her grandmother and told the truth for the first time in 3 years. If this story has meant something to you, if you've been here since part 1, since the gala, since the cubicle, since the corridor, since the corner table, like this video right now. Zarelle earned that like. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the notification bell, because the final batch is where everything becomes whole. Drop 1 word in the comments right now, just 1 word that describes how you feel at this exact moment. I'll go first. Redemption. Leora was already at the lounge when Zarelle arrived. She was sitting on the front step with her camera in her lap and her eyes slightly red, and a container of food from the Korean-Nigerian fusion place 2 streets over that they had discovered together 6 months ago and declared their official emergency location for moments requiring both jollof rice and tteokbokki simultaneously. She looked up when Zarelle came around the corner. They looked at each other for a long moment. No words, no performance, just 2 women who had been through something together and knew exactly what the other one was carrying. Leora stood up, crossed the pavement, wrapped both arms around her and held on with the specific fierce tenderness of someone who has been waiting to do exactly this since 9 o'clock that morning and has been running on the energy of that waiting ever since. Zarelle held on back. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Leora pulled back and looked at her face with the focused attention of a photographer reading a subject, taking inventory of every detail, every shift, every new thing present that was not there before. "You cried," she said. "Yes." Good cried or bad cried? Zarelle thought about it honestly, the kind that cleans everything out. Leora nodded slowly, satisfied. "Good." She held up the container. "I brought food." "I can see that. You're going to eat it and tell me everything, and then we are going to open this lounge and have the best Friday of our lives." A pause. "It is Wednesday." "I know it's Wednesday. We're opening anyway." Zarelle looked at her, this woman who had appeared on the 7th floor of a corporate building with a camera and a complete refusal to accept invisibility as a permanent condition, and had quietly, persistently, permanently changed the shape of what Zarelle's life in Seoul looked like, who had heard a hum above a kitchen sink and refused to let it stay a hum, who had sat on the floor at midnight eating cold food and listening without flinching to the story of Lagos, who had stood at the back of a music lounge on opening night and cried twice before the first song finished. "Leora," Zarelle said. "Don't," Leora said immediately. "Do not get emotional about me right now. I have already cried twice today, and my eyes are genuinely at capacity. Whatever you are about to say, save it for a day when my face can handle it." Zarelle laughed. Leora laughed, and they sat on the front step of Crossing Tides on a Wednesday evening and ate jollof rice and tteokbokki while Seoul did what Seoul always did, moved forward, indifferent and magnificent, paying no attention whatsoever to the small, beautiful things happening in its corners. This is what it looks like when a woman stops surviving and starts living. This is what it looks like when the silence ends. If you have been here since part 1, since the gala, since the cubicle on the 7th floor, since the corridor, since the corner table, since every Friday that built toward this Wednesday, subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already. Hit the notification bell, share this video with one person today, one person who needs a story like this, one person who is in their own Lagos moment and needs to know that what comes after the floor is worth surviving for. Like the video, Zarelle and Taerion both earned it. So did you for staying. Because he is coming. The knock came at 9:47. 3 knocks, measured, certain. The knock of a man who has made every decision he needs to make and is now simply executing. Zarelle heard it from behind the bar where she was arranging glasses she did not need to arrange. Leora was on the small stage, adjusting microphone levels with the focused efficiency of someone who wanted to be usefully occupied, rather than standing in the middle of whatever was about to happen. Zarelle set down the glass, crossed the lounge, unlocked the door, opened it. Taerion stood in the doorway of Crossing Tides on a Wednesday night with his jacket open, his tie loosened, and his hair slightly less structured than every other scene across every part of this story, the most undone physical version of this man that had ever existed, and his face carrying the most undefended expression he had ever seen on it. Not the chairman, not the 38th floor, not the man who ran a building with his name on it for a decade, just him entirely. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You're not supposed to be here until Friday," she said. "I know," he said. "It's Wednesday." "I know, Zarelle." A pause, in which Seoul hummed outside and the amber lounge light fell between them through the open door, and everything that had been building across 3 parts of this story sat in the specific charged silence of something that is about to become permanent. "I resigned the operational chairmanship this afternoon, effective end of month. Full ownership retained. The company is structurally unchanged and will continue without disruption." He paused. "I am no longer the chairman of anything." She stared at him. "Taerion, you did not have to." "I know I didn't have to." His voice was quiet and completely certain in the way of things that have been decided from the deepest available place. "That is the point." He looked at her steadily. "I spent 10 years being the chairman of everything. I was exceptional at it. I am not certain it made me genuinely happy for a single day of those 10 years. He stopped. Started again. "You make me happy," he said, simply, as if it were the most obvious fact he had ever stated. "This place makes me happy. Friday nights in that corner make me happy. Wednesday nights, apparently." A pause, the specific pause of a man who has never in his life said anything like this to anyone and is discovering that it is easier than he expected and more terrifying than he anticipated. "I did not resign for you. I resigned for myself, because I finally understood what I actually want my life to contain." She looked at him steadily. "And what do you want it to contain?" she asked softly. He held her gaze. "This," he said, "you, this place, every Friday and every Wednesday and every ordinary evening in between." Another pause. "Is there still a seat at the corner table?" Her eyes filled completely. She did not look away. She did not reach for composure. She did not calculate anything. She stepped back from the door. She let him in. Behind the bar, Leora made a sound that existed somewhere between a sob and a laugh, covered both hands over her mouth, and looked with extreme focus at the microphone stand she was definitely still adjusting. "I can hear you, Leora," Zarelle said without turning. "I am working. I am completely focused on this technical equipment. Ignore me entirely." Taerion looked at Leora across the room. Something moved across his face, genuine, warm, the specific expression of a man who understands exactly what this woman has done for the person he loves and knows that no formal acknowledgement will ever be proportionate to it. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for looking after her, for all of it." Leora lowered her hands. Her eyes were completely, thoroughly wet. She pointed at him with absolute seriousness and said, "You better deserve her every single day, not just today. Every single day I intend to." Leora pressed her hands back over her mouth. Zarelle held his hand, not dramatically, not as a performance, simply reached out and took it the way you take something you have decided belongs with you. She led him across the lounge floor to the corner table, his table, the one that had held him every Friday for 8 months, the one that had watched everything from a careful distance while the story built itself toward this moment. He sat down. She stood beside the table and looked at him sitting there, not hidden, not managing anything, not performing the careful distance of a man who has decided something and is waiting for permission, just present, chosen, at the corner table where he had always belonged. "Wait here," she said. She crossed to the stage. She stepped up onto it alone. No introduction, no occasion, no audience except the amber wood walls and the pendant lights in the amber, the menu cards on the empty tables, and Leora, who had put her camera down completely for the first time all evening and was simply watching with both hands pressed to her heart, and the man at the corner table. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the empty lounge, at everything she had built from nothing, from a carry-on suitcase and a cold decision and a city that asked no questions and gave no guarantees, at the amber walls she had chosen, at the menu that was half of where she came from and half of where she had arrived, at the stage light above her that she left on every night after closing, because an empty stage with a light on felt like a promise rather than an absence. She closed her eyes. She found the first note she had always found, not by searching, but by going quiet enough inside herself that the music, which had never truly left even through 2 years of deliberate silence, could surface on his own terms. She sang. She sang the song she had written at 24 in Lagos at 2 in the morning, the one that she had sung at the gala that stopped a ballroom breathing, the one that had brought a cold and precise man to the edge of a mezzanine railing and asked who she was before he knew her name, the one she had not sung for 2 years and then sang in a rooftop kitchen without meaning to, and Leora had heard and refused to stay silent. She sang it now not for a room of 300 strangers, not as proof, not as reclamation, not as performance of any kind. She sang it because she loved it, because she was free, because the silence was over, and it was over permanently, and she was never going back to it. Halfway through the final chorus, she opened her eyes. Taerion had not moved, both hands on the table, face completely open. The face that existed underneath everything the chairman had ever built over it, dark eyes on her. Full. Not composed, not managed, full. He did not look away. She did not look away. The final note rose, held, found every corner of the small, warm lounge the way it had found every corner of the Grand Hyatt ballroom months ago. Except this time, it was not performing, not demonstrating, not surviving. It was simply free. She let it go. The silence that followed was the most complete silence she had ever stood inside. Then Taerion brought his hands together, once, twice, slowly, deliberately, the specific applause of a person marking something that cannot be adequately responded to in any other way. Leora made a sound that was no longer pretending to be anything except exactly what it was, a full and complete and entirely unashamed sob, and covered her face with both hands and did not try to stop it. Zarelle stood at the microphone in her empty lounge on a Wednesday night in Itaewon, Seoul, and she smiled. Not the careful smile, not the managed one, not the smile of a woman performing contentment for a room that did not know her name. The real one. The one with nothing underneath it except exactly what it appeared to be, a woman who had crossed 6,000 kilometers and 2 years of silence and every version of loss a person can survive, and had arrived, finally, completely, irrevocably, at a life that was entirely and unapologetically her own. She stepped off the stage, crossed the lounge, sat down at the corner table, across from him. His hand found hers on the table. Outside, Seoul hummed its endless, indifferent, magnificent hum. The stage light held. And Zarelle Adebayo, who had once sat on the floor of a Lagos apartment with a carry-on suitcase and a passport and the specific cold courage of a woman deciding to survive, was not surviving anymore. She was living. Fully, completely, loudly, permanently, at last. That is the end. That is the complete end of Zarelle and Taerion's story. And if you made it here, if you have been with this story since part 1, since the gala, since the cubicle on the 7th floor, since the corridor, since the first Friday at Crossing Tides, since the corner table, since every moment that built toward this Wednesday night, then you already know that this ending was earned, every single word of it, by Zarelle, by Taerion, by you for staying. Hit the like button right now. This story earned it 3 times over. Subscribe to this channel if you are not already subscribed. Hit the notification bell. Every week we tell stories like this one, cinematic, emotional, stories about women who survive and rebuild and refuse to stay small, and men who finally learn what it means to choose someone completely and out loud. You do not want to miss what comes next. Share this video today. Send it to someone who needs it, someone who is on their own floor, in their own Lagos, making their own decision about whether to survive. Send it to them and tell them what comes after the floor. And drop a comment below. Tell me the moment, the one specific moment in this entire 3-part story that broke you wide open. Was it the gala? Was it the corridor? Was it the corner table beginning? Was it the press conference? Was it the flashback, the moment you finally understood how they got from the 38th floor to the lounge to every Friday? Was it this? Tell me. I read every single one. Thank you for being here. The stage light holds.